Traditionally, a lithophane is a very thin piece of porcelain etched with a design that can only be clearly seen when backlit. We're going to use a built-in feature of FlashPrint 5 that will allow us to import an original photograph that you've taken and convert that photograph into a 3D printable model, which, when backlit, will create the lithophane effect. In FlashPrint, click File, Load File, and look for our original photograph and load it in. Your settings may look different here. I'm not sure what the default settings are for FlashPrint, but for this particular photo, I found that these settings work best. Base thickness is the thinnest part of the lithophane, and I've set it to 0.6 so that it's thin enough to allow light to pass through easily, but not so thin as to risk there being a hole or a gap in the print. And maximum thickness, I found that 2.6 millimeters works well, again, for this photo, in that it lets some light through, but not as much light as in the thin areas. Maximum thickness is what it sounds like. That's the thickest part of the print. Now, realize that your photos may require some tweaking of these settings because your photo may have more contrast or less contrast, more detail, less detail, and you may need to tweak these settings to find the optimum range of thicknesses that will allow for the lithophane effect to take place. I'll click OK, and you can see that FlashPrint produces a sort of relief model that it lays flat on the print bed. So the thickest part of this model is 2.6, and the thinnest part is 0.6 millimeters. If you print the model as is, this is what you'll get, a sort of painterly effect. That's not exactly what a traditional lithophane is. Traditional lithophane is more photographic in effect. And to achieve this effect, we would need to stand the model up on its edge. And in order to prevent the print from falling over while it's being printed, we would need to add a raft. So if you print your lithophane flat, you'll get a more painterly effect. If you stand it up, then you'll get a more photographic effect. A lithophane, because it's based on a photograph, has a great amount of detail in it. And so these take a long time to print. So for instance, if I click Start Slicing, and I don't need a raft for this one because it's laying flat on the surface. Infill, I'm going to want to change this to 100% because I don't want the hexagon-shaped infill pattern to show through. I'll click Slicing. Let's see, it's taking a long time to slice. And if I click Slice Preview, you'll see that this print is 7 hours, 39 minutes long. So it takes a long time to print. If you have the time, you can start the print before you go to bed at night or first thing in the morning, and you'll end up with a nice lithophane. If you don't want to commit to that amount of time, especially with early prints, because you may or may not have the settings dialed in for best effect, so you may choose to downscale your model somewhat. So I'll click Close Preview, and I'm going to click Scale. And I'm not going to scale proportionally because I don't want to change the thicknesses, right? Those were set by the program at the beginning for what it thinks would be the ideal settings. What I'm going to do instead is uncheck uniform scaling, and I'm going to just scale down the X and the Y dimensions, leaving the Z untouched. I'll close scale, click Start Slicing, keep everything the same, slice. You can see it's slicing more quickly, and it's now a 2 hour and 1 minute print, so much faster. Remember that this will give that painterly effect because the print is laying down as it's being printed. If you want the photographic effect, click Close, click Rotate, and we want to rotate around the X-axis 90 degrees, so we'll click that. Now it's standing up, which is fine. Click Start Slicing. This time we do want to add a raft so that the print doesn't fall over. Click Slice. And Slice Preview. 2 hours and 20 minutes. Close Preview and click Scale. So I just want to point out that what had been the Z thickness, 2.55 millimeters, is now the Y thickness, right, from back to front. And it's important that this number does not change because we don't want to mess up the range of thicknesses calculated by FlashPrint. Remember that range of thicknesses runs from a minimum thickness of 0.6 to a maximum thickness of 2.6 for this particular photo at any rate. So whatever your settings happen to be though, you want to make sure that this number is always the same, whether it's in the Y axis because you're printing the model standing up, or it's in the Z axis if you're printing the model laying down. What you should get is a print that looks something like this. If you're printing the lithophane laying down and you're using glue stick, remember to first wash off the glue residue from the back of the lithophane. And then when you hold the lithophane up to a light, you should see either the painterly effect or the photographic effect, depending on which orientation you printed your model at. If your print has little holes or gaps in it, that means that the base thickness was too thin. This usually happens when you change the scaling and forget to reset either the Z or the Y to that magic number that we looked at earlier. Here's a model I printed using the sample roll of filament that came with the printer, the translucent red, and there are a couple things wrong with it. One, first of all, you can see the holes there, so I messed up the thickness. And the second problem is that I don't think that even if this were printed with the correct thickness, that the lithophane effect would be that striking. Mostly because the filament itself is already translucent, so it's countering the intended effect of the lithophane. Perhaps if you made the maximum thickness much higher, that would block more light and allow for more contrast, but I think working with solid colors is a better option than using the translucent filament for this particular project.